Why do most people hate to estimate? Two common reasons. One, we're always asking you to come up with some idea that's not very well defined and come up with a guess on how long it's going to take. And then two, you're guaranteed that somewhere down the line, someone's going to hold you to that estimate. So that's why most people don't like it. I don't know. But in Agile, estimating is very, very important. And why do we estimate? We estimate so we can make useful plans. When we look at an Agile project, planning is really something we do throughout the project. It's very important. We're always planning. It's different than your traditional project where you do a lot of planning up front and you just start going. We plan throughout the process. Why do we make those plans? So we can communicate, we can make better decisions, financial decisions, staffing decisions, project direction decisions. So we can coordinate schedules with other teams, both other technical teams, as well as marketing, sales, advertising, all the things that go into developing a product beyond just the software itself. And we look at ways to reduce risk. If we can estimate, we can plan, we can figure out where we're going to be, what we're going to do, look for the risks, and try and address them early. We also want to know if we're meeting expectations. So as we go through the project, are we ahead of schedule, behind schedule? What's happening? In Agile, again, planning is the important thing. We don't focus on the plan as an artifact, but we focus on the plan, the planning, the effort of the planning, going through the activity of the plan. We also acknowledge what we don't know, and this is really key to an Agile project. We know that we don't know some things when we start out, and we accept that. Particularly that we don't know the exact scope of the project. We don't necessarily know what the exact details we need to accomplish for tasks are going to be. We don't know who's going to do the tasks, exactly how long each task will take, and what's going to get in our way, either technical or organizational things. So with all those things we don't know, we have to come up with a way that we can estimate so we can make useful plans. And to do that in an Agile project, we want to estimate our size and derive our duration. So your traditional estimating is how many hours will something take. Well, acknowledging all those things that we don't know, we can't come up with how many hours it's going to take. So we come up with something else, which is the size of it. And then as we go, we figure out how long it's going to take, the duration. So to estimate the size, we have to have a prioritized backlog. The backlog in the Agile sense is typically a list of all the tasks or features and often user stories that we have that go into our product. We take that prioritized list of tasks and then we start sizing it. And sizing it simply means putting some numbers to it to understand how big each one of those stories is going to be. What we want to focus on when we do our sizing is consistency over accuracy. To say consistency, the important thing is that when we have features that are roughly the same size, they're estimated with the same value. So the estimated size is something that makes consistency easier to achieve. What I found works best for that is using a unit called story points. Story points are really a made-up unit that we use to express the overall size of the user story, feature, or other constraint. It's not in hours, it's just a relative unit that we use, totally unitless. But they compare to one another. So if we have 3 story points, we have 6 story points, the 6 story point story is twice as big as the 3. When I go in and talk about estimating, what I found works the best when we look at story points is how do we think about that? How do we conceive of the size of a feature in software? I like to look at 3 things: the effort, the complexity, and the uncertainty. Every story we can get some sense, and this is just the team kind of coming to a consensus on what it is, what the effort, complexity, and uncertainty is for each one of those stories. Sometimes the story takes a lot of effort. It's big. We know it's going to take a lot of time to code and test. But it's not very complex. We've done it before, and it's not very uncertain. We really understand the problems. It's not that big. Sometimes we have other stories that we don't think it's a big coding job, but it's fairly complex. There's complex algorithms and things we have to figure out to test, and there's a lot of uncertainty because we've never done it before. So we want to look at each one of those stories that we have and think about those 3 things, and then group them together. So you can see here the first story, we've got large effort, small uncertainty, and medium complexity. Story 2, the effort is medium, and the uncertainty is rather large, the complexity is small. But when you group those things together, you can see that both of those stories are roughly the same size. We've got a third story here where everything's big. It's much bigger than the other two. So we have to come up with some scale that we apply the numbers to. And what's often used is a modified Fibonacci sequence. So we guess at the points. Is it 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so forth. For each one of these, you can look at it and say, well, these two are the same size, so they better, to be consistent, have the same value. This one's much larger. So if we call each one of those a 5, this one's roughly twice as big, but we don't have a 10 in our sequence, so we go to the next bucket, which is 13. We get that at 13. The important thing about starting to size the backlog is you have to start somewhere, because we want to compare everything relative to one another. So we put a stake in the ground and say, this is what we're going to start with, and then we're going to go from there. The easiest way to do that is go through your entire backlog and find the smallest story. That's the simplest thing you can do. It's usually pretty easy to tell what that is. And assign that a story point of 1. And then we can fill in our sequence from 1, 3, 5, 13, and up, and start comparing stories to that 1. Say, is it the same size or is it bigger? If it's bigger, how much bigger? Is it twice the size, 3 times the size, and so forth? And then assign those story points next. One way that is often useful to do this is something called planning poker. It's where the entire team sits around, they get a deck of cards with the numbers on them, and we go through and we read each story, and then everyone gets to pick from their card the number that they think that story is relative to the other ones. This helps cut down on the groupthink, and it forces people to independently estimate each story. It can work very well, but it is time-consuming. Some people think it's fun. That wears off very quickly after you do it time and time. So with the estimated and the size backlog, we have something that we can measure. Right? So we know how big it is, but we still have no idea how long it's going to take. So to figure out how long something's going to take so we can actually plan and look forward into the future, get some idea on how much it's going to cost, who we need on the project, how many people we need on the project, we need to come up with something called velocity. Velocity is very simply the number of story points we can do within an iteration. With that value of velocity that we either estimate to start with, or better yet, measure as we go, we get an idea of how long the project's going to take, how much it's going to cost, when we can project schedule and dates. So just to review quickly, estimating is important and useful. Most people don't like to do it, but it is important and useful. Relative estimates work better. Use story points to do that. We involve the whole team in estimating. You can do that using planning poker technique. And then use the velocity to derive the duration from the sizes. Mr. Postmaster.